Okay, let's unpack this. We are embarking on a deep dive today that takes us, well, pretty far beyond the usual policy papers and market reports.
That's for sure.
Our source material is the transcript of an Ekantik Vartalap. So a very extensive private discourse with a spiritual teacher, Maharaj Ji.
And it's really an immediate, very practical distillation of ancient wisdom. It's not abstract philosophy.
No, not at all. It's responding directly to challenges that, serious practitioners of bhakti or devotion are facing right now in the chaos of the modern world.
That's such a crucial distinction. We're not dealing with theory here. This is, you could almost say, targeted spiritual engineering.
I like that.
So for you listening, your mission today is to acquire a kind of conceptual toolkit. It's about understanding how these timeless principles address incredibly contemporary, stressful issues.
Things like navigating profound disrespect at work, for example.
Exactly, or dealing with your own spiritual inconsistency, which is something so many people struggle with. And maybe the biggest one of all, the difficulty of complete practical surrender to the divine.
We've got a really rich stack of sources here, all drawn from this one single discourse. And it synthesizes these deep concepts like, the nature of ultimate spiritual truth, paramarth.
Versus worldly self-interest worth.
And it immediately grounds them in actionable advice. And some of it is, frankly, pretty radical advice. This is all about building resilience.
It's about internal sovereignty, really. This material gives you specific, rigorous methods for self-improvement and, I think crucially, for putting up internal boundaries against all that external adversity that's constantly trying to pull you off the path.
And it starts with a problem that is just universal to anyone trying to maintain order.
The collapse of discipline, the decline of conduct in society.
So let's start right where the source material begins, with this dilemma of discipline in what the discourse calls Kali Yuga.
The present age of conflict and, well, degeneration.
Right. And a primary school teacher comes to the spiritual teacher with a problem that could be from today's headlines.
It's so relatable. They're trying to discipline or correct children.
And this is the critical part. They're doing it for the children's own long-term good.
And what happens? Instead of cooperation, what does the teacher get? It's not just resistance.
No.
It's active abuse from the kids, and then it's followed by immediate aggressive backlash from the parents.
Which leaves the teacher experiencing this intense mental unrest. The text says, Mambahat Ashant, to the point where they feel totally detached from their duty. They're wondering, is it even worth it anymore?
It's a perfect storm, isn't it? Professional duty clashing with total spiritual exhaustion.
And the diagnosis given in the discourse is what makes this so significant. It's not seen as just an isolated issue in a classroom.
No, it's cited as a symptom of the increasing influence of the Kali Yuga.
Right.
The spiritual decline, it manifests socially. It's a breakdown of these fundamental, respectful hierarchies. The teacher in the source points to these signs everywhere.
Like sons disrespecting parents.
Students disrespecting teachers, disciples ignoring their guru. The whole spiritual infrastructure of society, which is based on tradition and respect, you see it collapsing.
So the teacher in the discourse, they anchor the solution in a fundamental principle. One that seems to apply across every domain, from a classroom to like a royal court.
The need for shasan.
Governance.
Discipline. Right. And the assertion is absolutely unequivocal. Learning, order, it all fundamentally relies on discipline, on dant, not just on affection, pyre.
So affection is there to nurture, but discipline is what actually shapes.
Precisely. The material insists that governance is essential in every single department of life. Spiritual, professional, you name it. To maintain order and stop things from degrading. The analogy they use is perfect.
The potter and the clay.
If the potter only showed affection and never disciplined the clay, what would happen?
You just have a lump of mud.
Exactly. It would remain a shapeless lump.
That makes perfect sense philosophically, but the reality on the ground, especially in a modern classroom, as the source points out, is, well, it can be toxic.
It's dangerous.
The teacher is facing genuine threats. Students are saying things like, meet me outside, we'll see what happens. So the principal is now risking personal safety.
And this raises a really profound ethical dilemma that the spiritual teacher has to tackle. Do you sacrifice your life for the principle of discipline? Or do you adapt to protect your own spiritual practice, your own inner peace?
And the advice given is, it's a necessary adaptation. It's a concession to this severely hostile environment.
The teacher is told, point blank, to prioritize protecting their own life and their internal peace.
So what does that look like, practically speaking? How does that translate into action?
The advice is to teach only as much as is strictly necessary. You fulfill the minimum requirement of your duty, and then, this is key, you consciously disengage from the result.
You leave the consequence to karma.
You literally hand the fate of the students over to divine justice. The statement is stark. The karma you do, you will suffer. It's a form of spiritual withdrawal.
But that's not apathy, is it? It sounds more like spiritual self-preservation.
It is absolutely self-preservation.
It's saying, look, I did my duty to the best of my ability without risking my life or my sanity, and the rest is managed by a higher law. I can't let their disrespect contaminate my mind.
That's it, exactly. And what's critical here is the comparison to how things used to be. The Discourse mentions a time when students were taught, as a matter of course, to touch the feet of every teacher.
A fundamental sign of respect, of surrender. Sharan.
And that contrast just highlights how far things have fallen in this age. It necessitates these difficult, almost defensive measures that prioritize preserving the devotee's own consciousness.
You can't save the world if you're being destroyed by its degeneration.
You really can't.
That sets up a really profound shift from dealing with external conflict to dealing with internal conflict. What happens when the source of this unrighteous conduct, this adharma, isn't a stranger in a classroom?
But it's your own family, your close friends.
Right. A listener shares this exact pain of being constantly exposed to negative, unrighteous behavior from loved ones.
And that exposure leads to a condition the text calls malinta. It's a kind of internal spiritual pollution, stagnation.
A real spiritual blocker.
Totally. The practitioner is trying to maintain focus, chanting the name of Radha, but the negativity all around them is just causing this irritation, this internal churning. It completely derails their progress.
So how do you reconcile that? The sacred duty to family versus the spiritual imperative to maintain your own purity.
This is where the Discourse provides a very precise, very clear-cut, three-stage solution. And it prioritizes the eternal spiritual path, the isht, above any temporary worldly relationship, the swarth.
It acknowledges how hard it is, but it gives you a roadmap.
It does. Stage one is reasonable. It's what you'd expect.
Make an effort to explain and guide them. You have to at least try. You have to fulfill that worldly duty of trying to help the person you love.
And if that verbal effort fails, you move to the second, higher stage, prayer.
You appeal to the divine for their improvement.
Right. You're recognizing that their change is beyond your power now. Only God's grace can turn them around. At this point, you've done your duty as a human well-wisher and as a devotee.
Okay, but the third stage, this is where the rubber really meets the road. And it's probably the most ethically challenging piece of advice for a modern listener.
Abandonment.
Which the teacher immediately clarifies. It's not about being cruel. It's about maintaining distance. Dori Bonalina.
This is the critical, non-negotiable step. The source does not mince words on this. It cites a very powerful spiritual reference. Which
means?
It means abandon them like a million enemies, even if they are very dear to you, if they act contrary to the divine will or your chosen deity, your isht.
That is a radical instruction. I mean, when we hear the word abandonment, we think of cruelty, of coldness. But you're saying here it's an act of, what, spiritual hygiene.
Absolutely. The Discourse is clear. If your deep affection, your snehi, for them starts to contaminate your own practice, if it's leading to that malinta, that spiritual stagnation, then that attachment has to be severed, or at least distanced.
You have to recognize that worldly relationships, family, friends, they're temporary contracts.
They last maybe 80, 100 years. The relationship with the divine is eternal.
So the goal is to prevent that spiritual contamination. But how do you actually maintain that distance without the other person feeling punished or without fueling resentment, which would just make the whole problem worse?
The distance has to be maintained internally first. That's the most important part. You have to neutralize the emotional charge. You might have to be physically present sometimes, family gatherings and whatnot. But internally, you have to stop investing in their unrighteous actions. You stop giving energy, validation, or argument to their adharma. By stepping back, you're protecting your bhakti. The spiritual path demands the highest priority, and the guru is insisting that no worldly tie, no matter how cherished, can justify jeopardizing that eternal goal.
So the distance is a shield, it's not a weapon.
Exactly, it's a shield, not a weapon.
That idea of prioritization, the absolute necessity of putting the eternal relationship first, that moves us perfectly into the second section. Understanding the nature of pure love.
This is a great question that comes up.
It really is. A listener asked something that shows this profound self-awareness. It's almost bordering on spiritual paranoia.
Right.
They desire Guru Seva, serving the Guru physically, cleaning clothes, preparing food, eating leftovers, but they're worried. Is intense desire actually just impure self-interest, swarth?
Because it gets them physical proximity, Samipta. They're worried their desire for closeness is actually just selfish.
This is a fantastic question. It forces the spiritual teacher to define where the laws of the material world end.
And the laws of the spiritual world begin. And in the material realm, the universal rule is, well, it's pretty dark.
Surnarmuni sabikiya riti, swarthalag sab priti.
Which is the way of the world. It is the way of gods, humans, and sages. All affection is driven by self-interest.
Yes. Worldly affection is considered ashuddha, impure. It's always tainted by lust, by attachment, by the desire for personal gain, even emotional gain. If a friend helps you, deep down there's an expectation they might return the favor. That's swarth.
But the relationship with the guru and the isht, the chosen deity, that is the fundamental exception to this rule.
It's the one exception, exactly. The guru and the isht are not just figures, they are embodiments of paramarth. That's spiritual benefit, the ultimate truth.
So the key is the object of the desire. That's it. The teacher explains that any desire directed towards them, even that seemingly selfish desire for physical closeness or for asking for prasad, the blessed offering, it's automatically transformed. That desire is consecrated. It's elevated into paramarth.
So the desire itself is cleansed and purified by the object it pursues.
Yeah.
That's a massive paradigm shift from, conventional psychology, which often treats any desire as being inherently rooted in the ego.
It is totally unique. The desire for service to the divine is not selfish. It's the natural expression of pure love, the Shuddha. When you serve the guru, you are serving paramarth directly. That yearning for samipta, for closeness, is actually proof that the attachment is spiritual, not material. And therefore, it can only lead to greater purification.
So the service acts like a spiritual magnet.
Pulling the devotee out of that material definition of self-interest. Yeah.
Speaking of spiritual attainment, the conversation then shifts to the role of grace. A listener expresses some confusion. They've heard that attaining Vrindavan, the sacred land of intense devotion, requires decades of tearful longing, arduous effort.
But for them, they feel they received it easily, sahajmi. And they're wondering if this effortless attainment means their experience is somehow shallow or not real.
This is where the teacher has to reconcile the need for effort with the reality of grace. And they use one of the most brilliant analogies in the whole discourse.
The engine and the compartment.
Let's pull that apart. What defines the engine?
The engine is self-effort. It's the path of rigorous devotion, intense austerity, years of struggle to build up the spiritual power you need to move yourself toward God. Achieving that engine takes immense self-generated power.
But the listener, who got to Vrindavan easily, they are not the engine.
No, they are the compartment. They have attached themselves to the spiritual engine of the great acharyas, the spiritual preceptors, the lineage masters.
So the compartment itself is powerless. The text says, Koi samarth nahi.
It hasn't generated its own effort or power, but because it has surrendered and attached itself completely to that engine, it gets carried to the final spiritual station, regardless of its own power deficiency.
That gives such a profound context to Acharya Guru Sharanagati, surrendering to the lineage. Their attainment isn't earned by their own personal tears.
No, it's gifted. It's gifted through the collective spiritual momentum and grace of everyone who came before them in that line.
It really highlights the power of surrender. Shri Ji ki kripa.
Absolutely. The Acharya, the Guru, the Isht, the mantra in this tradition, it's all focused on Radha, on Shriji. By simply taking refuge, the devotee taps into centuries of accumulated grace, of intense devotion.
So you might feel like you don't deserve it.
But the grace of the engine operates irrespective of the compartment's merit. It just pulls you along for the ride.
That seems like an enormous reassurance. But, it could also create a vulnerability to delusion, especially when it comes to spiritual guidance.
A very real danger.
And before we transition, the teacher addresses this directly. The validation of spiritual instructions that you might receive in a dream.
This is such a vital safeguard against man ki chal, the tricks of the mind. The teacher gives an absolute rule here.
What is it?
If you receive an instruction from your guru in a dream, you must not act on it immediately. Your first step always is to approach the physical manifest guru, the Pragat Gurudev, and ask for confirmation.
So the physical objective reality of the guru has to validate the subtle subjective experience of the dream. Why is that so mandatory?
Because the mind is a master illusionist. It is so easy for the mind to create the appearance of the guru and deliver false or distracting instructions. It can lead you down a really dangerous path of arrogance or, well, hypocrisy, pakhand.
So if the Praga Gurudev says, yes, that was my instruction, then you're good to go.
Then you accept it and you act on it.
But if the guru says, no, I did not give that instruction,
Then the disciple is immediately required to recognize it as a delusion, a trick of the mind, period. This keeps the Pragat Gurudev as the final objective authority, and it prevents the disciple from becoming a victim of their own spiritual ego or, their imaginative fervor.
it ensures genuine guidance isn't confused with self-generated fantasy. That necessity of relying on the objective guide, it seems designed to prevent that.
Yeah.
That stop-start existence that so many practitioners have.
The inconsistency.
And that inconsistency is the very next topic. A listener reports experiencing these profound, deep moments of immersion in devotion. Tears are flowing, meditation is focused.
And then it's followed by these long, dry periods where they have zero interest in worship, zero interest in chanting, nothing.
This fluctuation is probably the most common affliction of spiritual life. And the Discourse explains it not as a moral failing, but as a direct consequence of the three gunas.
The qualities of nature, they're just taking turns at being dominant. It's almost a scientific explanation for spiritual apathy.
We know the basics of the gunas, but let's detail exactly how they manifest in spiritual life, especially for you if you're learning about this.
Okay, so first you have sadhaguna, that's goodness or purity. This manifests as devotion, clear focus, the desire to serve, a sense of peace. This is when the practitioner feels that deep, tearful immersion.
That's the on switch.
That's the on switch. Then comes rajaguna, passion, activity. This immediately redirects the mind toward worldly goals.
So what does that look like?
It could be obsessive professional networking, chasing status, constantly checking your devices, seeking honor, or just indulging in sensory gratification, in bhag. It's a lot of productive energy, but it's completely misdirected from a spiritual point of view.
And finally, the destructive quality.
Tamoguna, darkness or lethargy. This is the heavy one. Overwhelming apathy, spiritual laziness, excessive sleep, and sometimes even anger or violence. When your mind is dominated by tamo, you just cannot sit down to chant. Or if you do, your mind is foggy and just resentful.
So these dips, these low points,
Yeah,
they're just the practice moving under the control of these natural cycles.
exactly.
So the practitioner's dilemma is, how do I maintain momentum when Rajo and Tamo kick in and all my motivation just evaporates? We can't just sit around and wait for Sattva to return.
Absolutely not. And this is where the teacher introduces a really radical solution, Jabarjasti Bhajan.
Forceful, rule-based practice.
Right. To overcome the dominance of those lower gunas, your practice has to be done strictly according to a rule, a niyam. If you committed to chanting 5,000 names or reading a certain passage every morning, you must do it. Even if your mind is screaming in protest and you feel absolutely zero spiritual inspiration.
But doesn't forcing the practice lead to resentment? Or just mechanical repetition instead of true, heartfelt devotion? I mean, that's the counter-argument that immediately comes to mind.
It's a critical question, and the teacher anticipates it. Jabarjasti Bhajan is not about mechanical action. It's about the conscious intention to obey the rule. That's the higher principle.
I see.
The mind says, I hate this, I'm bored. But the soul says the rule stands. By overriding the mind's temporary desire for bhag or sleep, you are literally training the mind to submit to the divine will. It's like spiritual conditioning.
Like going to the gym even when you don't feel like it.
Exactly. The regularity strengthens the muscle regardless of your temporary motivation.
So the lack of feeling doesn't invalidate the effort? The act of obedience is the devotion in that moment.
Precisely. And the Discourse gives a very clear marker for when this forceful practice has finally succeeded. This is the arrival of siddhi.
The fixed state of spiritual maturity.
True siddhi is when devotion always increases. It's compared to the waxing phases of the moon. Prem sadabasho, karayo shasha kalasuro.
A perpetually growing love.
Yes. If your devotion decreases, or if you stop, or if you still have these dramatic highs and lows, it is a definitive sign that your practice is still operating under the tyranny of the gunas. The fixed state has not yet arrived. It's a really rigorous barometer. It demands that unbroken, disciplined effort.
And for that effort to even be meaningful, it has to rest on a foundation of moral purity.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to the necessity of ceasing papa acharan wrong actions or sins.
The source is extremely strict on this alignment. Spiritual practice bhakti, it requires the cessation of gandhi acharan, immoral, sinful conduct.
So the teacher labels the act of, say, chanting and wearing devotional marks while also engaging in immoral conduct
As hypocrisy pakhand, or outright spiritual arrogance dam.
So the external display of piety can't mask internal degradation. The devotion just becomes hollow. It's a form of self-deception.
Exactly. And to illustrate the need for consistency in both your actions and your devotion, the teacher uses the perfect story.
The tortoise and the hare.
Of course. Even slow, steady progress, the kachukichal, is guaranteed success if you maintain that unbroken consistency.
The tortoise is often seen as slow, but in this context, it represents reliability. It represents that rule-based practice.
And the hare represents the practitioner who feels good after a burst of devotion. They think they've reached some high state, and then they stop for a little temporary sensory pleasure, manoranjan or bog.
The spiritual sleep.
That's it. That temporary pause, that sleep, it destroys all the momentum they've gained. It allows the material world, or just their own mind, to defeat them. That quick thrill or that momentary moral lapse empowers the mind to retreat even from a position of strength.
So consistency is the guarantee of success.
It's everything.
Consistency in practice requires purity, and purity demands we confront the ultimate internal adversary, the ego, ahankar.
Right.
But how do we even know if we're afflicted by ego? Especially when our actions on the surface seem pious.
The source material gives a surprisingly simple and devastatingly accurate diagnostic tool.
What is it?
Ego is present when you see faults, dosh darshan, in other people, and at the same time, you only see virtues, gandarshan, in yourself.
So it's a biased, self-serving mirror. It judges everyone else harshly while it justifies all of my own deficiencies.
That's it.
So if I spend my time internally correcting how other people practice while feeling really proud of how consistently I'm chanting, that's a sure sign I'm deep in ego, regardless of my external devotion.
A textbook case.
So how do we eliminate this fundamental fault-finding tendency?
3 specific, actionable methods are prescribed, and it starts with the antidote to arrogance.
Which is?
Chanting Bhakta Namafali.
Reciting the names and glories of other devotees. Why is that uniquely effective?
Well, because arrogance thrives on the idea that I am the best, or I am better than them. By reciting the names and glories of historical devotees, like those compiled by Dhruvadas Ji or Bhagwat Rasik Ji, you're forced to contemplate the staggering depth of divine grace in others.
So acknowledging their greatness naturally crushes your own self-importance.
It has to. It shows you your own comparative smallness on the spiritual path.
That recognition of greatness elsewhere, it immediately breaks the spell of self-importance. What's the second method for eliminating ego?
Cultivating deep humility, dainya. And this means seeing God, Bhagwan, seated in every single being you encounter.
Not just some, but all.
All. And furthermore, you have to constantly remind yourself that your ability to even perform good actions, to sit and chant, to avoid sin, it's not your own earned merit. It is entirely due to God's grace. If that grace were pulled back for just a moment, you would immediately fall into wrong actions. The ability to be good is a gift, not a right.
And the final method ties this all back to surrender.
Continuous, fervent prayer to God, specifically to remove the ego. The realization has to be driven home that we've created nothing of ourselves. Not our body, not our mind, not our intelligence. They're all gifts from God.
And if we're just managing borrowed equipment, what possible ground do we have for arrogance?
None whatsoever.
This philosophy of total dependence and gratitude, it leads directly into the radical principle of absolute divine trust.
Vishwas.
This is a tough one.
It is. The core teaching is that trust must be placed exclusively in God, in Bhagwan, because people are inherently weak, nurble, and unreliable.
So the immediate question is, if we can't trust people, how do we even function in society? Does this mean we stop collaborating, stop hiring people, stop relying on doctors and teachers?
Right.
But the spiritual teacher reconfigures the entire lens through which we view human interaction. The goal is to eliminate that negativity.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because the advice isn't really to distrust people, it's to shift the source of the trust. Exactly. We're advised to view every interaction through the lens of God's action, not human agency. So if someone helps you, you don't just say, oh, I'm so grateful to them.
You realize God inspired them. Bhagwan ne prerit kiya.
The person is merely the instrument of divine mercy. But the credit, and therefore the trust, belongs only to the divine. And this preserves your internal stability.
So what about the flip side? What if the person betrays the trust, or cheats you, or harms you? That's where our internal peace is most severely damaged.
And this is the test. The devotee is trained to view that negative event as divine management. It wasn't that person cheating you. It was merely an old karmic debt being settled, which allows you to become free. Mukta.
That mindset is revolutionary.
It is, because it eliminates dosh darshan, the fault finding, toward the person who hurt you, and it preserves the internal peace of the one who was hurt, because you view the event as a necessary purification managed by God.
The teacher shares a deeply personal story to illustrate this divine management, this yogikshem.
The principle that God directly manages the affairs and welfare of the surrendered devotee.
Yeah. The story's about his own kidney failure.
It's such a powerful moment of conviction. The teacher recounts that when his kidney failed, he was severely ill. Yet he continued his spiritual worship, his chanting, without seeking any external help.
He was completely immersed.
Maintaining absolute trust that whatever happened, God would manage it. He was reciting a specific devotional verse focused entirely on the divine name.
So he wasn't even disrupting his spiritual focus to call a doctor or arrange for a ride to the hospital.
That's the essence of the test. He did not ask for assistance, and yet, without him asking, God intervened. The teacher recounts that a specific acquaintance who had no idea what verse he was even reciting was inspired.
To travel all the way from Kolkata.
And bring a renowned doctor with them.
That is just astonishing logistical support.
And the detail that follows is so crucial. The person who arrived said, "I didn't tell you I was coming because I didn't want your spiritual focus, your chintan, to be disturbed." The entire rescue operation was arranged outside of the devotee's awareness, driven by divine inspiration, simply to make sure that the devotee's single-pointed focus remained completely undisturbed.
The surrendered devotee's physical life is managed by the divine. The spiritual focus is the priority, and God handles the logistics.
That's it. The devotee is not a victim of circumstance. They are the center of divine attention. And it forces you, the listener, to question your own safety net. Is your safety net your insurance card, or is it the divine? If it's the latter, you are truly protected.
This leads us naturally to the test of exclusive devotion, or ananyata. A listener admits that when difficulty arises, pratikalata, they feel this urge, this almost instinct.
To pray to other deities, other forms, other than their chosen Ishtav.
And this is defined uncompromisingly as a weakness in devotion.
Right. Ananyata means absolute conviction that your Isht is entirely capable, Sarvasamarth, of providing both your spiritual welfare, your yogakshem, and your ultimate protection.
The spiritual integrity of the path demands that singularity.
Yeah.
If you believe your chosen deity is not enough, that very belief taints your whole practice.
And the source cites the poet Tulsidas to just hammer this point home. Tulsi, arang tabam tabanwe pedur.
Which means?
It means, if my welfare happens because I sought help from another deity or another source, may that attainment be covered in dust.
Wow.
True devotion requires accepting the outcome, success, failure, health, or sickness, only from the Isht. Even a momentary glance elsewhere is a rejection of that absolute trust.
That concept of exclusive trust brings us right to the ultimate requirement for discipleship, the qualification for becoming a worthy student, ashishya yogyata. So what is the non-negotiable entry requirement?
It's just one thing, complete self-surrender, atiyam samarpan.
That's it.
That's it. The teacher insists nothing else is essential because all other qualities, knowledge, control, devotion, all of that will be bestowed by the Guru's grace. But the student has to first surrender the self.
This relationship is perfectly illustrated by that potter and clay analogy.
Yes, the Guru is the potter, the disciple is the clay. And the disciple comes in hard, full of all this material conditioning and ego.
So the potter has to pound the clay. Sometimes strike it, sometimes refine it with harsh discipline, shasan and orders, adesh.
Which is painful, but necessary. That discipline is used to destroy the disciple's inherent ego and shape them into a desirable, usable vessel for divine service.
The barrier to that surrender, then, isn't a lack of effort. It's often having too much pre-existing knowledge.
Yes, exactly. Those who approach the Guru already full of their own learning, thinking, well, I know this principle, how can your instruction be contrary to it? They get stuck.
In that debilitating loop of unnecessary questioning, the Kyon-Y cycle.
Right. The greatest benefit comes from approaching the Guru as a blank slate Karakagaz Bankar, simple, obedient, and just ready to be written upon.
So once that submission is achieved, what is the ultimate offering a disciple can make to the Guru?
It is the mind, the man. The greatest gift is the fully committed consciousness of the disciple.
This runs so counter to cultural expectations, which often emphasize large monetary donations or, elaborate physical service.
It really does.
Why is the mind so much more valuable than wealth, rupiah, or even physical proximity to Samip?
Because all those external offerings are meaningless if the mind is still engaged in the world, in the Vishayan. You can be physically present, cleaning the guru's temple, but if your mind is obsessed with last night's argument or next month's profit margin,
You're spiritually miles away.
you're not there at all. The mind controls the destination of the soul. The guru's instruction has to color the mind, not just the body.
So offering the mind means relentless obedience. It means actively following instructions for chanting, Naam Jap, for mantra repetition, for scriptural study, Shastra Swadhyay. It's intellectual and emotional obedience over external ritual.
And we have a definitive measure for when that offering is complete. The thermometer test for complete surrender, Paripakva Sharanagati.
How do we know if we've truly surrendered the mind or if we're just, practicing the idea of surrender?
The measure is continuous, unbroken contemplation of the divine. Bhagwat Chintan Nirantar. The teacher compares it to a stream of oil-tail Dharavat Chaltahai, which flows without any break or interruption.
So if my contemplation is intermittent, sometimes God, sometimes my worldly worries, it means I'm still in the effort phase of surrender.
Exactly. You're practicing, but you haven't yet reached that fixed state where the mind is permanently offered.
This state of complete offering is, it's likely to attract the attention of the world. Which brings us back to the challenge of mockery and opposition.
It always comes.
When a devotee lives this disciplined life, they inevitably face judgment. You hear things like, oh, he thinks he's a great devotee, or what are you going to get by chanting and wearing that mala?
And the initial reaction might be resentment or discouragement. The Discourse advises the devotee to accept this mockery as a test of tolerance of sahanjilta. But first, the devotee has to engage in a really rigorous self-check.
So use the mockery as a diagnostic tool.
Precisely. The devotee has to ask, is the criticism true? Is there some genuine hypocrisy, pakhand, or some wrong action, papa acharan, in my conduct that the mocker has actually spotted?
So if the criticism highlights a genuine flaw, the mocker is basically acting as God's agent to warn you and correct you.
And you must fix that flaw immediately. If, however, after that self-reflection, you determine you are sincere and the criticism is unfounded, then you accept it as a test of your tolerance, you ignore the mocker, and you move on, fortified by your practices.
The key is not to retreat. Don't let fear make you hide your tilak or your kanti, your sacred symbols.
No.
And this need for conviction and courage is perfectly illustrated by that anecdote of Madhukar Shah.
This story is the ultimate proof that true devotion demands strength, not timidity. The setting is the royal court of Emperor Akbar.
Right.
And he's seeing his nobles increasingly engaging in devotional practices, wearing the tilak, the forehead mark, and the kanti, the sacred necklace, and he's getting politically and religiously irritated by it.
He saw it as a sign of weakness or maybe dissent.
Exactly. So he issued this terrifying decree. Anyone wearing a tilak in his court would be branded with a hot iron. This was a direct, violent challenge to the spiritual identity of his ministers.
So what was the response of Madhukar Shah, who was a minister and a dedicated disciple of Harinam Vyasji?
Madhukar Shah, he understood the gravity of the spiritual challenge. He went home, applied a large, conspicuous tilak on his forehead, making it absolutely impossible to miss.
And crucially,
He returned to court with his sword drawn. He marched straight up to the emperor and challenged him directly.
what did he say?
He said, "You are the king of one country. This is the tilak of the emperor of infinite universes. Who among us has the courage to remove it?"
That is just profound, audacious conviction. It's asserting the sovereignty of the spiritual realm over the temporal ruler.
Akbar was stunned into silence. The challenge was so absolute, the courage so evident, that the emperor feared not just a physical uprising, but a spiritual consequence. He was forced to recognize the sincerity and the force of true devotion. The story proves that spiritual commitment cannot be timid. It has to be backed by fierce, unshakable strength and conviction to withstand the pressures of this degenerative age.
And to bring this entire deep dive to a close, the final call to action centers on securing a meaningful life and ultimately ensuring a meaningful death.
The goal, as the teacher phrases it, is to ensure your death is a festival, Amritu Mahotsav, without regret.
And that state of celebration at the time of passing, It's only possible if you practice chanting the divine name in every single breath, swaz, sumiran care throughout your entire life.
If you spend your life immersed in papachan or worldly pursuits, your final thought will just reflect those attachments. And that leads to a negative consequence, a durgati.
So the power of constant repetition of the divine name, specifically Radha, Radha in this tradition, is the final insurance policy.
It conquers Maya, illusion. It overcomes the fear of death, and it destroys the cycle of birth and death. The goal is to make the name so habitual that it is guaranteed to be your final contemplation, ensuring you remember God at that crucial moment of passing. #tag outro.
We've covered an enormous amount of ground today. We've translated ancient ethical discourse into, really, tools for contemporary resilience. For you, the learner, the immediate takeaways are clear. Discipline, Sharan, must be applied forcefully to yourself.
Trust belongs exclusively to the divine.
And the most valuable spiritual offering you can ever make is a consistently disciplined and focused mind, the man.
And if we connect this all back to that first section, remember the importance of conduct and self-reflection. When you face judgment or mockery or opposition in your life, your first response has to be diagnostic.
Take that criticism and hold it up to the light.
Does it reveal any hypocrisy, any pahand, or any wrong action, papachan, that needs to be corrected? If it does, then that critic is actually your friend.
But if your path is straight, you reject the judgment, you fortify yourself with Jabarjasti Bhajan, and you move forward with the conviction of Madhukersha.
Because your ultimate path is one of total surrender. The spiritual teacher emphasized the principle that chahi bikar nahi, desire itself, is beggarliness.
So if absolute trust in God eliminates all need for worldly anxiety and desire, chami chintamit manu abhiparva, here's the provocative thought for you to carry forward.
What one thing right now are you still asking of the world instead of the divine? What desire are you still carrying that reveals a lack of absolute trust?